Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Scales and Tales, and this is Scott Henderson's Pentatonic Substitution Secrets. And I've actually had this lesson on the back burner for a while, and I've had some requests to kind of feature, more pentatonic substitutions and some of Scott Henderson's music. And before this, I actually did the Dean Parks 3-for-all, and in that episode, there was a pentatonic substitution. So I put that together, I thought about it, and I think now is the time to hit the Scott Henderson, secret episode. And this is really eye-opening, very inspiring. I know the first time I saw this demonstrated, it just blew my mind. I had no idea that this was kind of happening, behind the scenes. And it really showed me like how important and powerful chords are. And, all chords come from scales, but then the chords themselves kind of dictate and steer scales in certain tonalities and certain, areas, whether it's a static chord or a chord progression or whatever. So chords definitely dictate and define everything you hear in music. And like I said, if you haven't seen this before, this episode is probably going to blow your mind, because I know the first time I saw this, I just couldn't believe it. I thought, wait, I had no idea all that stuff was happening, kind of hidden behind the scenes. So if you're curious about this or you're a big Scott Henderson fan, this episode's totally for you. So Scott Henderson is a legendary jazz and fusion guitarist, and I've definitely been aware and a fan of his ever since I was in high school. And then when I became a student at AIM, like in the early to mid 90s, which I've shared this story before, but Scott came, that was the first, clinic that came to the school when I was a student. And, he came for this guitar clinic and everybody was really excited. I think I'd only been a student for it was like the first or second week of classes. So I was green, brand new to the school, barely knew like my fellow classmates at that point. Went to the clinic, Scott showed up, and it really wasn't a clinic, it was a tribal tech concert. He brought his band with him. They came in and just jammed. And I remember as soon as they started, it was so loud and it sounded so good. And everybody was just like deer caught in the, headlights of a car, like, oh my gosh. And they played like 3 songs. Scott, answered some questions and stuff and showed some like rig secrets and some equipment stuff. Jammed on a few more songs, did some Q&A, jammed on some more songs, and that was it. And I remember when I left, I was forever changed. Like it basically helped me like kind of hone in. And it's like, you know what? I want to study jazz. I want to learn what they're doing. Because at that time, I really hadn't studied jazz. I'd studied rock and blues and some different styles. But definitely, Scott kind of influenced me and inspired me to try, jazz on for size. And I'm still trying it on for size, but I definitely love jazz. I love all forms of music. But if you're new to Scott Henderson's name, this is definitely a great place to start with the solo albums and tribal tech albums. So start here. And then if you like what you heard from Tribal Tech and Scott's solo albums, then dive even deeper and check out Chick Corea and some of his guest appearances. And definitely check out the T. Lavitz instructional video, the late great keyboardist from the Dregs. Scott and Gary Willis actually appear on T. Lavitz instructional video. That's a really cool instructional video, even though it's keyboard. But then, they're basically doing like these vamps and jams behind T. Lavitz and doing different styles and stuff. Great video. So the concepts and ideas in this episode actually came from 2 Scott Henderson-related sources, and the first source was actually a 5 or 6 page handout from a clinic that he gave at GIT in 1989, which it was called GIT back then. It's MI now. But it was like a handout, from his clinic, and he broke it down during his clinic from back then. And then also kind of a ripped page from a Guitar School magazine. I think it was the March 1992 issue with Stevie Ray Vaughan on the cover. And he basically broke it down again, but in a different way. So we're going to basically approach both like the handout approach and also the Guitar School lesson that was in the magazine. And it's kind of a two-way street. And it's interesting to kind of see like the same material broke down 2 different ways from Scott Henderson. So buckle up. Here we go. All right, the first concept we're going to tackle here actually came from the Guitar School magazine lesson from the March 1992 issue. I think it was called A Tonic for Your Pentatonics. And in that lesson, Scott basically locked into one pentatonic position, like the minor pentatonic box right there in C minor, right here. Right? And then what he did is he locked into one scale, and then he started moving the chords, behind that scale and kind of creating these different tonalities and modal, flavors and stuff. And it was really eye-opening to see it kind of broken down this way. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to use the MXR clone looper and just loop a C minor pentatonic box like this. So it's just the scale, right? Just up and down. C minor pentatonic. Now I'm going to play a C minor 7 chord, you know, under that, and it's going to fit perfectly because it's minor on top of minor, right? You know, it fits. That's the most common pentatonic, you know, application, minor on top of minor. Now we could also flip that C minor 7, we could flip to the major, you know, the relative major, E flat major. And if I do that, now it's going to magically change C minor pentatonic to E flat major pentatonic, right? C minor 7. Common still, like major and minor pentatonic. So let's do something different now. Let's start venturing into different territory. Let's take that minor 7 chord, that C minor 7. Let's take that, move it back a whole step. Now B flat minor 7. But we're going to play C minor pentatonic on top of it. It's going to have kind of a Dorian flavor. There's C minor 7. And then that B flat minor 7. And just by changing that chord, it kind of steers the scale in a different direction. Let's do that again. Let's do an F minor 7 right here. Interesting to hear how that scale changes. B flat, C to F. And those were all, you know, minor 7th chords right there. But that's really eye-opening to see, like, wow, we changed the chord and that scale starts to morph into other, you know, tonalities and scales. Like that B flat was kind of Dorian. And then the C minor 7 and F minor 7, it's kind of like in the middle right there. It doesn't really have the 6th, which is what we need for Dorian. So it's basically Aeolian or Dorian because we're missing the necessary notes. But right there, for those two, it definitely has an interesting sound though. So what happens if we throw major 7th chords in the mix? Let's see what happens here. So if we basically continue looping C minor pentatonic, I'm going to use that same loop, but now I'm going to play a D flat major 7, you know, behind it like this. And this is going to have a Lydian tonality like this. Now take that, move it down to A flat major 7, and now it's going to have an Ionian kind of typical sound. So there was D flat major 7 and A flat major 7. So after that series of major 7th chords, in the lesson Scott started including Hendrick chords here, you know, 7 sharp 9. And the first one's, you know, C7 sharp 9 with C minor pentatonic played on top. This is the traditional way to use, you know, that chord and scale, like the way Hendrix did, like this. You know, a really traditional sound right there. Take that C7 sharp 9, move it up a whole step. Now D7 sharp 9 with C minor pentatonic on top, kind of a Dorian flavor. Right? C7 sharp 9, D7 sharp 9. What about A7 sharp 9, like this big kind of spread voicing right there? Still works, right? Check Check out, G 7 sharp 9. Move that down a whole step right there. And since we're investigating that G7 sharp 9, let's go ahead and throw out a G minor 7 flat 5. Now we're going to apply Locrian using a C minor pentatonic scale. So G minor 7 flat 5 like that. And check it out, it still works. Alright, now we're going to explore the other concept, and this came from Scott's handout from the clinic that he gave at GIT in 1989, and it's the same material, just the opposite view of it. So instead of, locking into one scale and changing the chords behind it, now we're going to lock into one chord and change the scales behind it. And this is really going to help you see like what we're doing here. So we're going to start with major 7th. We're not going to really bother with the minor 7th world because that's pretty common, pretty easy to understand. But then, major 7th chords. I've had so many students over the years ask, like, how do I play over major 7th chords? It's hard. And it is hard, especially if you have a big blues or blues rock or rock background. All your blues and rock licks won't work over that jazzy, major 7th sound. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to loop a C major 7, just that stock voicing right there. And then the first scale we're going to hit is actually the major pentatonic. So C major pentatonic, which technically is A minor pentatonic, right? It's, the pentatonic starting on the 6th. So right there we're going to do... like that. And that's C major pentatonic played over C major 7. Sequence that I use, we're actually going to use this with all the scales here, so you can really get an earful of what you have. So right there I did a hammer-on pull-off on the A, and then I basically go all the way up the scale after that. Hit that high C, and then you're going to do this sidestepping fourths kind of thing on the way down. That way you have some kind of intervallic ear candy, when it descends. And that's way more interesting than just going, straight down the scale, right? Like this. So here's that sequence played over, C major 7, and it's basically C major pentatonic. Now we could also investigate playing minor pentatonic on the 2, which is D, right? So thinking we're playing C major 7, but we're going to play, minor pentatonic starting on D. So D minor pentatonic over C major 7. Honestly, I'm not really a big fan of this sound. It's okay, but that F kind of, to me, it wants to be an E, like the 3rd of C so bad. Like that F. But you could definitely target that E if you wanted to. So you could definitely add, that E note back in. But there's D minor, pentatonic played over C major 7. It's okay. But then the other one here, the last one for this major 7 world, we're going to basically play, the major pentatonic on the 3rd. So now we're going to basically start on E right here. So E minor pentatonic over C major 7 is going to sound really good like this. We actually have to add that root note because C doesn't exist in E minor pentatonic, but we can always add it in there. But there it was, E minor pentatonic played over C major 7. And there's your root right there. What about Lydian or sharp 11 sounds? We can definitely hit those using pentatonic scales. And right here, as far as the chord, we could basically play like a C sharp 11 or C add sharp 11. And then for the scale hack here, just think basically minor pentatonic on the 7. So, in the key of C, the 7th is B. So really just think of like C minor pentatonic and then just go down 1 fret and you're there. So instead of C minor pentatonic, we're going to play B minor pentatonic, over the C sharp 11 chord, and you have this Lydian kind of flavor like this. And once again, you have to add the root because the root's not in the scale. Like right there. And there's your sharp 11. Basically B minor pentatonic played over C major 7. Last tonality we're going to hit here is Mixel Lydian, that flat 7, dominant 7 kind of sound. And this might seem really obvious because a lot of players might just use the minor pentatonic scale and maybe bend or smear the thirds, or maybe dominant pentatonic. Definitely dominant pentatonic jams over 7th chords, but we're talking about pentatonic substitutions here. And it does seem like a lot of guitarists forget about this because they tend to think of major pentatonic as this bright, happy, major, scale, which it is. But it also fits over 7th chords because you don't have a flat 7 in the scale. So C minor pentatonic is technically, C major pentatonic is technically A minor pentatonic. And we're going to play it over a C7 chord like that. So technically A minor pentatonic, which is also C, over C7 sounds like this. You're just missing that really important flat 7, B flat. You don't have that flat 7 sound. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Scales and Tales with this look at Scott Henderson's Pentatonic Substitution secrets. And I realize this is pretty eye-opening and pretty heavy stuff if you haven't encountered or seen this before. If you have seen it before, it might be a good review and maybe kind of, open some different doors that you haven't had open before. But for new, viewers of this material, it really will kind of melt your brain at first. Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Because typically a lot of players just match minor scales with minor chords, major scales with major, chords. And then when they start mixing and blending and making hybrids, or they're implying something, these modal tonalities and stuff, you can get confused pretty easy. But the big benefit here, and there might be some viewers out there wondering like, well, why are we using pentatonic substitutions? Shouldn't I just learn the full scales? Yes, you should. You should learn the actual scales themselves, the 7-note, scales and modes that exist. But then, kind of kicking back to this pentatonic approach, it's giving you a different way of kind of viewing this material. Also, all your stock licks and phrases and all these things that you've learned, with the minor or major pentatonic scale, you can kind of recycle some of that information in a different way, like over a different chord type or progression. And it really is kind of like a reduce, reuse, and recycle type of approach. And this is just one approach. I mean, keep in mind, there are hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of different approaches. This is just one. So this really is just a sample, like putting your toe in this big pool of information and kind of checking out the temperature, like, hey, should I dive in and swim here? And yes, you should. Check this out. Don't be shy or afraid. Dive in and do a big belly buster right into this information. Because it's going to open some doors, it's going to help you understand the importance of chords, scale and chord relationships, modal, implied modal tonalities and stuff like that. And I guarantee, all these like 5-note pentatonic shapes, by you working on it like this and using this approach, you're going to be playing, 5 notes, right? But then you're going to start grabbing some of those notes you're missing, like maybe you want the flat 5, or maybe you're missing the 5th or the 3rd or something. You're going to start adding those notes in to your licks and phrases. And then the next thing you know, these 5-note pentatonic scales are going to morph and turn into 7-note scales, like full, major and minor scales. You might start making hybrid and synthetic scales, 8, 9, 10-note scales or whatever. You never know. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And we didn't really get very far into this material because it does get really heavy and confusing as you start getting into like altered chords and stuff like that. But very eye-opening, very inspiring, very interesting stuff to practice. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.